In the winter of 1891, a construction crew digging beneath a crowded street in Philadelphia uncovered something they were never supposed to find. The workers expected broken sewer brick, maybe an abandoned gas pipe. Instead, their shovels struck a smooth iron surface buried almost 12 feet below the road. At first, they assumed it was part of an old drainage tunnel. Then, one of the men noticed the strange ceramic brackets attached to the walls inside. Not pipes, conductors. The tunnel stretched into darkness beneath the city like a hidden artery. Along both walls ran thick copper rails mounted on porcelain insulators, perfectly spaced, untouched by corrosion. The workers later claimed the air inside felt strangely warm compared to the frozen streets above. One laborer swore he heard a low humming sound coming from deeper inside the passage. By the next morning, city officials arrived and sealed the excavation site before reporters could get photographs. 3 days later, the newspapers described the discovery as obsolete utility debris. And that should have been the end of the story. Except it wasn't. Because when historians later examined Philadelphia's official electrical timeline, they found a problem. According to the accepted record, large-scale electrical distribution in that district would not exist for another 7 years. The power company hadn't even been incorporated yet. The infrastructure beneath the street was older than the industry supposedly capable of building it. That contradiction keeps appearing. Not once, not twice, but across dozens of cities built during the 19th century. Chicago, Boston, Vienna, St. Petersburg, Baltimore, Prague, San Francisco. Everywhere you look, there are traces of electrical systems that seem to arrive before their inventors do. Modern history tells us electricity entered city life gradually. A few experiments here, a few arc lamps there. Then Edison and Westinghouse industrialized the process and transformed the world. Simple, clean, profitable. But the deeper you dig into municipal archives, the stranger the story becomes. Because hidden inside engineering records, demolition permits, sewer reports, and excavation logs is another version of history. A version where entire cities already contained electrical infrastructure before commercial power companies officially existed. And the people who found those systems often reacted the same way. Confusion first, silence second, then removal. In 1884, workers renovating an old government building in Boston discovered sealed conduits beneath the basement floor. The conduits contained copper wiring wrapped in a black resin-like material no contractor on site could identify. An engineer later wrote that the insulation appeared far older than expected for modern electrical work. His report recommended further examination. That examination never happened. The basement was filled with concrete less than a week later. No public statement was issued. No photographs survive. What makes stories like this unsettling isn't the possibility that old electrical systems existed. Experimental systems absolutely did exist during the 19th century. Historians already acknowledge that. What makes this different is scale. These weren't isolated experiments attached to laboratories. They appear to have been city-wide networks, buried, integrated into architecture, already old by the time officials rediscovered them. And sometimes the documents describing them contain one word that keeps resurfacing like a fingerprint left behind by a vanished civilization. Tartarian. Not Tartaria in the internet conspiracy sense people joke about today, not giant mud floods or fantasy empires stretching across continents. The original references are much stranger because they're casual. Municipal engineers use the term as though everyone reading the report already understood what it meant. That's the part nobody can explain. In an 1879 survey of underground infrastructure beneath Cincinnati, an engineer described older Tartarian conduits unsuitable for integration with the new commercial lines. He did not define the term, he did not place quotation marks around it. He treated it like standard professional language. Then, after the 1890s, the term nearly vanished, as if someone slowly erased it from technical vocabulary. Imagine discovering references to a forgotten operating system buried inside modern computer manuals, then watching the term disappear from every technical textbook within a decade. That's what happened here. And once you notice it, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Take New Orleans. During renovations following severe flooding in the late 19th century, workers repeatedly discovered underground chambers lined with glazed brick and fitted with strange metallic mounting points along the walls. Officially, these were categorized as abandoned drainage systems, but one city inspector privately noted that the chambers lacked proper water flow design and instead resembled service corridors for an unidentified municipal utility. The phrase disappeared from later copies of the report. Not crossed out, not corrected, simply gone. That tiny edit matters because it reveals something deeper than conspiracy. It reveals discomfort, the kind institutions feel when evidence doesn't fit the timeline they've already sold to the public. And timelines matter, because whoever controls the timeline controls invention, and whoever controls invention controls money. By the 1880s, electricity was becoming the most valuable industry on Earth. Patents alone were worth fortunes. Investors poured millions into companies promising to electrify cities. Entire financial empires arose around the idea that modern electrical infrastructure was new. But what happens if it wasn't new? What happens if parts of that infrastructure were already there? Suddenly, the story changes completely. The inventors become inheritors. The Industrial Revolution becomes less about creation and more about acquisition, and enormous amounts of money begin resting on keeping the official narrative clean. That possibility terrified people inside the industry. Private letters from municipal engineers during the 1880s reveal growing frustration about unexplained underground systems appearing during construction projects. In several cases, engineers requested permission to investigate older conduits more thoroughly. The requests were denied, again and again. Sometimes the explanation was safety, sometimes cost, sometimes no explanation appeared at all. One engineer from Cleveland wrote to a colleague in 1888 saying, "Every old system we uncover is removed before proper examination can occur. It is as though the city fears its own foundations." That sentence never appeared publicly. It survived only because the letter remained hidden inside a university archive for nearly a century. Then there's the architecture itself. Look closely at major civic buildings constructed during the late 19th century. Massive courthouses, train stations, exhibition halls, government buildings. Many contain features that seem oddly excessive for the technology officially available at the time. Huge interior lighting spaces, decorative metallic spires, copper-heavy rooftop structures, complex underground sublevels. Engineers today often dismiss these as aesthetic choices. Maybe they are. But some researchers argue they may have served another function entirely: energy collection, distribution, transmission. Not in a magical science fiction sense, in a practical infrastructure sense. Because the 19th century was obsessed with atmospheric electricity. Scientists openly experimented with grounding systems, electrostatic collection, and wireless transmission, decades before mainstream textbooks suggest. Nikola Tesla didn't invent humanity's fascination with harvesting electrical energy from the environment. He inherited an existing field already filled with strange theories and half-forgotten experiments. And Tesla himself occasionally hinted at older knowledge being lost. In one interview, he reportedly said humanity was rediscovering principles once understood intuitively. What principles? He never clarified. But by the early 20th century, many alternative electrical systems had vanished from public discussion altogether. Standardized commercial grids replaced everything else. Independent systems disappeared. Older conduits were removed during modernization projects. Historical references faded. The world became electrically uniform, metered, billable, controlled. And maybe that transition was completely natural. Maybe old systems truly were obsolete. Maybe every strange discovery beneath those cities has a perfectly reasonable explanation buried somewhere in forgotten paperwork. But if that's true, another question emerges. Why does the paperwork keep disappearing? Fires, floods, demolitions, missing archive boxes, destroyed field notes, entire collections vanishing just before researchers can examine them. Individually, none of these incidents proves anything. Together, they create a disturbing pattern. In 1902, an archivist in Baltimore attempted to organize older municipal engineering records related to underground electrical conduits discovered during sewer expansions. According to a surviving memo, he planned to publish a review comparing several pre-commercial installations of uncertain origin. The archive suffered a fire 2 weeks later. Only one room burned. His room. Officials blamed faulty wiring. Ironically, the very thing he had been studying. And here's where the story becomes truly uncomfortable. Because the deeper researchers looked into these forgotten systems, the more they noticed another recurring detail. The infrastructure often appeared hidden intentionally, not abandoned naturally. Sealed tunnels, bricked-up access corridors, disconnected junction boxes, copper lines cut cleanly instead of corroding apart over time. Someone didn't merely stop using these systems. Someone shut them down, carefully, methodically, almost like preserving them from accidental rediscovery. Which raises the biggest question of all. If these buried networks were real, who built them? And why was the world taught to forget them? By 1901, most Americans believed electricity was a triumph of modern industry. Newspapers celebrated inventors like celebrities. Cities competed to install brighter lights, larger power stations, and more impressive electrical grids. The future had arrived, glowing in white arc lamps and buzzing trolley lines. But beneath that polished public story, something strange was happening underground. Construction crews across multiple cities continued discovering systems that didn't fit the official timeline. Not experimental wiring, not primitive prototypes, complete infrastructure. And the people uncovering it increasingly understood they were seeing something they weren't supposed to question. In Detroit, workers excavating foundations for a warehouse expansion reportedly broke into a sealed brick chamber beneath the old commercial district. Inside, they found thick ceramic insulated conductors running through cast iron channels embedded directly into the walls. According to a surviving newspaper clipping, one foreman described the chamber as looking less like a basement and more like part of a buried machine. The article disappeared from later newspaper archives. Researchers searching microfilm decades later found the page partially removed. Not damaged, removed. That distinction matters. Damage is random. Removal is intentional. And by the early 20th century, intentional removal seemed to follow nearly every major discovery connected to unexplained electrical infrastructure. In London, portions of older underground conduit systems uncovered during subway expansion projects were classified under restricted engineering records for reasons never fully explained. In Prague, workers restoring older districts repeatedly encountered sealed metallic chambers beneath public squares. Officials categorized them as obsolete utility vaults and ordered immediate closure. The language always sounds the same: obsolete, unsafe, unnecessary. But the systems themselves often showed little evidence of decay. That contradiction haunted the engineers who encountered them. One retired municipal surveyor from New York wrote privately in 1912, "The old lines beneath the city appear constructed for a purpose greater than street illumination. Their scale exceeds practical necessity." Greater than street illumination. That phrase stayed buried in a personal journal until the 1970s, and it forces us to ask something uncomfortable. What if these systems were never designed merely to power lamps? What if electricity during the 19th century was understood differently than we understand it today? Modern electrical systems depend on centralized generation. Power plants create electricity. Transmission lines distribute it. Consumers pay for access. Simple, efficient, profitable. But many of the buried systems discovered during that era lacked obvious generating stations nearby. Some engineers noted that the conduits seemed designed to draw energy through distributed networks rather than centralized supply. At the time, fringe researchers called this idea earth current utilization. Today, most historians dismiss it, but the concept wasn't fringe in the 19th century. Scientists across Europe and America openly studied naturally occurring electrical currents within the Earth itself. Telegraph operators frequently observed unexplained voltage surges traveling through grounded lines. During geomagnetic storms, some systems reportedly operated temporarily without batteries attached. That's historical fact. And certain engineers began wondering whether cities could someday harness those natural currents directly. Most failed, at least officially. But what if a few didn't? That possibility sits at the center of nearly every Tartarian theory circulating today. Not a lost empire with impossible technology, not science fiction. Something stranger. A forgotten infrastructure transition. An older electrical philosophy buried beneath a newer commercial one. And if that sounds impossible, consider how often history simplifies technological change into neat narratives that investors can sell easily. The automobile replaced the horse. Television replaced radio. Streaming replaced cable. Clean transitions, clear winners. But reality is rarely that simple. Technologies overlap, compete, disappear. Sometimes superior systems lose to more profitable ones. History remembers the victor, not necessarily the best design. That truth applies everywhere, from transportation to warfare to communication. Why would electricity be different? Especially when billions of dollars were involved. By 1910, electrical monopolies controlled enormous portions of urban infrastructure. Standardized systems created recurring revenue through meters, patents, maintenance contracts, and government licensing. Independent or unmetered systems threatened that business model entirely. And buried infrastructure that nobody owned represented a nightmare scenario. Imagine discovering a fully functional communication network today that required no telecom companies, no subscriptions, and no centralized control. Entire industries would collapse overnight. Now imagine what powerful corporations might do to prevent that discovery from spreading. Suddenly, the aggressive removal of older systems stops looking irrational. It starts looking inevitable. That doesn't mean shadowy secret societies controlled everything from hidden rooms. Reality is usually less dramatic and more dangerous than that. Institutions protect themselves naturally. Industries defend profitable narratives automatically. Bureaucracies bury inconvenient evidence because acknowledging it creates instability. No master conspiracy required, just incentives. And incentives shape history more effectively than almost anything else. By the 1920s, most physical evidence connected to pre-commercial electrical anomalies had either vanished or been absorbed into modern infrastructure upgrades. Younger engineers entering universities learned standardized electrical theory disconnected entirely from the strange discoveries of previous generations. The older vocabulary disappeared too. Tartarian lines, unknown galvanic systems, ancient municipal conductors. gone. The words became embarrassing, then ridiculous, then conspiratorial, and ridicule became the strongest defense mechanism of all. Because once an idea becomes socially radioactive, serious people stop investigating it publicly. Careers depend on avoiding association with fringe subjects. Historians who ask uncomfortable questions risk professional isolation. Engineers who speculate too openly damage their credibility. So the silence continues. Not because everyone secretly knows the truth, but because almost nobody wants to touch the subject anymore. That's how historical erasure actually works most of the time, not through dramatic censorship, through gradual social pressure that makes curiosity itself seem foolish. And yet, the discoveries never fully stop. In 1987, workers renovating an abandoned municipal building in Montreal uncovered a hidden maintenance corridor beneath the structure. Inside were ceramic electrical mounts connected to copper pathways leading deeper underground beyond collapsed debris. One contractor photographed the corridor before officials restricted access. The images briefly circulated among local historians, then disappeared. Years later, one surviving witness claimed the city ordered the entire section sealed permanently during renovation. No public explanation was ever issued. In 2003, utility workers in St. Louis reportedly discovered buried conduits unlike any documented local electrical system while replacing older water mains. According to one retired employee, the conduits looked ancient but better engineered than half the lines we install today. The project records are incomplete. Again, always incomplete. And maybe that's coincidence. Maybe cities simply lose records constantly because bureaucracy is messy and history decays naturally over time. That explanation is entirely possible. But at some point, the coincidences begin stacking high enough to form a pattern difficult to ignore, especially when the pattern always favors forgetting, never remembering. That's the detail that lingers after all the theories fade away. Not whether Tartaria existed, not whether hidden empires powered cities with mysterious energy. Those ideas may ultimately prove exaggerated or completely false. The real mystery is simpler and far more believable. Why does modern history seem so determined to flatten the complexity of the past? Why are we taught technological progress as a straight line instead of a chaotic battlefield filled with dead ends, suppressed ideas, forgotten experiments, and buried systems? Because maybe the strangest possibility isn't that advanced infrastructure existed before official history says it should have. Maybe the strangest possibility is that civilization forgets things constantly. Important things, useful things, world-changing things. And once enough time passes, the forgotten becomes mythology, then conspiracy, then comedy, until nobody digs beneath the surface anymore. But the surface is exactly where these stories keep breaking open. A collapsed sewer in Chicago, a sealed chamber in Detroit, a hidden tunnel beneath Philadelphia, a junction box behind a wall in Salt Lake City. Fragments, ghosts, shadows of a system that official history either cannot explain or no longer wishes to examine too closely. And somewhere beneath one of the cities people walk through every day, there may still be tunnels nobody has opened in over a century, copper lines untouched by modern engineers, sealed conduits waiting behind collapsed brick walls, forgotten infrastructure sleeping silently beneath layers of asphalt and concrete. Not magical, not supernatural, just hidden. And perhaps that's what unsettles people most about the Tartarian mystery. Because if even part of the story is true, then history is far less stable than we like to believe. The modern world may not stand entirely on invention. It may also stand on inheritance. And buried beneath the noise of traffic, beneath subway tunnels and sewer lines and steel foundations, there could still be remnants of a forgotten electrical age, waiting for someone curious enough to dig too deep. If they do, the real question won't be what they find. The real question will be whether anyone lets them keep looking.